Our Torah reading, Parshat Vayishlach. Last week, Vayetze, and he went out. Jacob went out from the land of Israel, fleeing his brother Esav, from whom Jacob had deceptively obtained a blessing. Although just before Jacob left, now Isaac being of dimmed eyes, knowing that he is blessing the younger of the two sons, says to Jacob, in the name of El Shaddai, which is the same name used for God before the covenant was offered by God to Abraham, in the name of El Shaddai, you will be blessed to be part of this chain of covenant with God, and God will allow you to multiply, and this land will be your land. Jacob went as a strong young man. In fact, as Jacob reached the well in the area of where his uncle Lavan, his mother's brother, lived, he saw a very large rock on the well. And gathered around it were all the shepherds, and he saw this beautiful young woman approaching. And he said to them, "Who is that girl?" And they said, "Well, that is Rachel, the daughter of Lavan." And he knew that that was his cousin. And so in a showing of his own manliness, he single-handedly, with great strength, moved the boulder from the top of the well. And in the intervening 20 years, he would work 7 years to marry that woman, but marry through the seed of Lavan, her older sister Leah. And then he would work to marry Rachel. He would marry her and then work another 7 years. And then for 6 years, he would work for his uncle Lavan in order to amass a large, very, very large flock of all kinds of domestic animals. And then, as we saw last week, he decided that his uncle Lavan was no longer seeking to show him favor, nor Lavan's sons, and they fled. And so now Parsha Vayishlach. Vayishlach, and he sent, in this case, Jacob sent all his wives and all of his possessions forward. In reading Parsha Vayishlach, as Jacob now prepares to reunite with his brother Esav, 20 years having passed, he is terrified. Esav had vowed, and his mother, Rebekah, had overheard it. When Dad dies, that brother of mine, I'm going to kill him. In the text, it's not clear whether Isaac has died or not at this point. But what is clear is that Jacob is terrified, and so he prepares. The first thing that he does as he prepares to return to the land is he says to his servants, "Go ahead and say to my brother Esav, your servant Jacob is returning to meet you." And so the servants go with these words of, "Your servant is coming." And they say, "He is coming to greet you, Esav, but he's bringing 400 soldiers with him." Oh, now Jacob is really scared. And so he does a variety of things. He prays to God. He divides his wives and children and his possessions into two different camps, as if when Esav comes, maybe he'll just destroy half of his possessions, thinking that was all. And he then prepares gifts 550 animals. And he'll say, which is explicit in this developed narrative to the people bringing these gifts to his brothers, space yourselves apart, almost flock by flock. And when my brother Esav comes to you and he'll say, to whom is this flock? Say, this is a gift from your brother Jacob to you. And so a full day passes. A night and a day have passed as Jacob has lived with uncertainty and terror. Everything now is on one side of the river, and Jacob is left alone, not yet choosing to sleep in the promised land. He's still on the other side of a river called the Yabok, which Yabok is Amatapia, kind of a bubbling river. Yabok, apparently it's a river between what is today the Dead Sea and the Kinneret, if you think of those two important waters in Israel, kind of in the middle, but on the side of Jordan. And there, he's alone. Also, Yabok not only sounds like bubbling, but it sounds like la'avok, which is to struggle, la'avak. And indeed, that night, Jacob struggles. It's such a cryptic story that you're not clear as to what's going on. Listen in. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all his possessions. V'yivater Yaakov levado, and Jacob was left alone. V'ya'avek ish imo, and wrestling with him was a man, ad alota shachar, until the rising of dawn. Vayar kilo yacholo, and when he saw that he was unable to him, vayigah b'chaf yerecho, and he wrenched his thigh. V'tegah kaf yerech Yaakov, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket. V'havako imo, in the avak, in the wrestling with him. Vayomer, and he said, Shalcheni, send me. Ki Allah hashachar, for dawn is rising. Vayomer lo, and he said, no, Eshalcha, I won't send you. Ki im berachtani, until you bless me. Vayomer lav, and he said to him, Ma shemecha, what's your name? Vayomer Yaakov, and he said Jacob. Vayomer, and he said, Lo Yaakov Ya'amer od shimcha, Jacob shall no longer be your name. Ki im Yisrael, rather it will be as Israel. Ki sarita im Elohim, for you struggled with God. V'im anashim, and with people. V'tuchal, and you proved able. Vayishal Yaakov, and Jacob asked, Vayomar, and he said, Higadana shemecha, tell me please your name. Vayomer, and he said, Lamazeh tishal lishmi. And he said, why do you ask my name? Vayvarecho teisham. And he took leave of him there, or he blessed him there. Vayikra Shem Hamakom Peniel, and Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, Ki Ra'ita Elohim Panim El Panim, for he had seen God face to face, V'tinatzel Nafshi, and yet my spirit was saved. V'yisrach lo Hashemesh kasher avaret Penuel, and the sun rose upon that place as he passed Penuel, Solea al Yerecho, limping on his thigh. Al kain lo yochlu v'nei Yisrael ad gida naseh, therefore Israel no longer eats the sciatic nerve. Ki naga b'kaf yerach Yaakov, for the thigh of Jacob had been dislocated begid hanasheh, at the thigh muscle. You could see in my reading and translating how confusing the story is, because it keeps saying, and he, and you never know, in terms of that wrestling, which of the he's is being referred to. Is it this man wrestling with Jacob, or is it Jacob? Is it a man? Is it an angel? Is it God? Is this a dream, or is this, in fact, a wakeful struggle? It's short, it's brief, confusing, and profound in its impact. A name change. No longer will your name be Yaakov, it will now be Yisrael, Kisi Rita im Elohim, for you have wrestled with God. The commentators are divided as to who it was or what it was that Jacob was wrestling with. Some will say that Jacob was wrestling with the angel of his brother Esav, which is to say, he was wrestling with what he had done in cheating his brother, by deceiving his father, by demanding of his brother his blessing before he would give him, famished, some soup to eat. That he was wrestling with his conscience, and that it would foreshadow Israel's wrestling with all its foes for generations after. Some say, of the commentators, that it was his own angel that he was wrestling with, the angel that yearned for God, that he was wrestling with his own spirit, his own desire to be more than a Yaakov, one who goes roundabout, but one who could be straight in how he spoke and how he lived and how he related to God. This Yaakov, who had removed that boulder from upon the well, now will meet his brother limping. He will no longer be so mighty. He will indeed have paid a toll for all what he had done in his past. And so the brothers meet. And as the two brothers come toward each other, Vayaratz Esav likrato, and Esav ran to greet him. Vayichabkehu, and he hugged him. Vayipol al tzavarav, and he fell on his neck. Vayevku, and they cried. There is reconciliation. And so the brothers meet again, and at the end of this description of Jacob telling him of the 20 years that had gone, Esav will say, I'll go with you. As you're now entering the land, let me accompany you. And Jacob begs off. He says, I got too much to deal with here with all my possessions. You go ahead. We can't keep up with you. And you can't help but wonder how in this moment Jacob is both relieved and still distrustful. But here's what I want to focus in on, because I'm really enjoying these bibliodramas in recent weeks. An intervening story, a long story of Jacob's daughter Dinah, who seems to be raped by one of the locals. At least that's how her brothers understand it. And Shimon and Levi, two of the brothers, will engage in a massacre of the local people that were part of Shechem, the name of the area, and the name of the son of the local sheikh, who had both been physically intimate with Dinah, but wanted her, and the text will say, out of love, to remain his wife. But here's where I pick up this story. Chapter 35. Vayomer Elohim el Yaakov. And God said to Jacob, Kum ale Veit El, get up and go to Bethel. V'shev sham, return there. V'aseh sham mizbeach, and make there an altar. Le'el hanireh alecha, to the God that appeared to you. That is when Jacob was about ready to leave the land, and he had that dream of the ladder with the angels going up and going down. And there, that place would be called Bethel, and there Jacob would erect a stele, a monument, and dedicate it to God. And so he says now God is talking to Jacob. And he says to him, go to the place where I appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, rid yourselves of the alien gods in your midst. Purify yourselves and change your clothes. Come, let us go to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. They gave to Jacob all the alien gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears, identified as also having been amulets, and Jacob buried them under the terebinth, the oak that was near Shechem. As they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Now I add, after Jacob's sons had massacred some of the residents. Thus Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. There he built an altar, and he named the site El Beit El, for it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. And then it says, God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, quote, Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov. No longer will you be called Jacob. Ki im Yisrael yiyeh shemecha. Rather, it will be Israel that will be your name. V'yikare et shemo Yisrael. You will be called. Thus he named him Israel. V'yomer lo Elohim, and Elohim said to him, Ani El Shaddai, I am El Shaddai. Perei urve, be fertile and increase. Goy ukal goyim, a nation, yes, an assembly of nations, yishyeh mimeka, will come from you. Umalachim chalatzecha yitzeu, and kings from your loins will emerge. V'et ha'aretz asher natati l'Avram Yitzchak, and the land that I gave to Abraham and to Isaac, lecha etnena, to you I will give it, ulzaracha acharecha, and to the seed after you, eten et ha'aretz, I will give the land. God parted from him at the spot where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up a pillar at the site which we had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it. Jacob gave the site where God had spoken to him the name of Beit El. Well, a lot of context for a relatively shorter bibliodrama. Here's the tension. Jacob has not yet been, Jacob wrestled with that stranger. The angel, the stranger, says your name will no longer be Jacob, but will be Israel. But only now, after having been in the land for a while and having had this darkness of this massacre, will Jacob flee that area, go back to Bethel, and there God will appear and say, your name will not be Jacob, it will be Israel. From here to the end of Genesis, 45 times the name Jacob will be used, and 34 times the name Israel will be used. But it will only be used for the first time as this chapter 35 continues. And so a brief bibliodrama of Jacob in the aftermath now, not of having wrestled with the angel, but of having heard God directly speak to him and offer the new name, Yisrael. And the question is, what does this name mean to you, Jacob? What does it mean to you that God has also clearly declared your name, Yisrael? I walk with pain. My hip was dislocated. On the night before I returned to this, the land that my father Isaac had told me would be given to my seed. How often I returned in my mind to this place. How often I wondered if I would ever return, and if I did return, whether my brother Esau would slay me as soon as I set foot on this disputed land. His land or my land, or the land of the people that dwell here. Yaakov was the name I was given at birth. Yaakov, a heel, for I held on to the heel of Esau. But Esau was somehow first out. I always wondered if he was simply stronger than me. And I, in my youth, hovered in his shadow. He who became so mighty a hunter, I could never compete and didn't try when it came to physical strength. I was strong, but in ways that were untested. I was strong in ways that now when I returned to the land, I knew I had a capacity to endure. And that night, that second night, as I was on the cusp of entry into the land, I chose to be alone because I needed to catch my breath. For the intervening 20 years had placed so many demands on me, and I had so longed for my mother and my father, and yes, for my brother. And for those nights before I entered the land, I could not sleep, for the fear overwhelmed me. And the night that I separated and was alone, it was not clear to me if it was a dream or real. It was not clear to me when I found myself wrestling who was on top and who was on the bottom. Would I prevail or would I never enter into the land? I was unclear if I was wrestling with my brother Esau and his angel, or if I was wrestling with my highest self, guiding me to that I could be more, that I could be straight and responsible. And as I heard in that moment, as I held my adversary, as the sun was rising, proclaimed that my name would be Yisrael, I knew that as I entered into the land, that the 20 years had allowed me to come forward anew. No longer the one who Yaakov, who went around, but Yisrael El, who was straight with God, the one who could wrestle with God, the one who could take on responsibilities as a sar for God, and most importantly, Yisrael, the one who declares that God is supreme, that it is God who is the sar. For I knew that the covenant demanded of me ultimately to declare that whatever I had received in my life was a gift from God, that it is God who directed my return home. Yisrael. Well, my return was not easy. My brother somehow did accept me. But my sons, that unruly, the daughters, the son, my daughter, my sons, my daughter, sons protecting my daughter, created a conflict that caused me to return to Beit El. This time, my return was unlike the first time I was at Bethel. When I awoke from my dream as I was getting ready to leave the land, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. Wow, there was God in this place and I didn't know it. Now, God speaks to me as Elohim, the God of judgment. But more, as I listen to God, God says, I am El Shaddai. The same name of identity that God had used in addressing Abraham, my grandfather, before covenant, and that my father had used for me in giving me knowingly a blessing to be the heir to that covenant. And now I heard God clearly, God renewing the covenant of saying that I would be the father of many, and that this would be our land, this holy, promised land. And I knew now that indeed I was changed. I was home. And I heard now for the first time God declare that my name would be Yisrael, the one who had earned through life's hardships a transformation into being straight, to being responsible, into being a bearer of proclamation, Yisrael, that it is God ultimately who is supreme. And now I return to blessing Jacob with the prayer that Jacob will bless us. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, may you who blessed Jacob as Yisrael be a source of blessing to us, his descendants. May we know as well that the goal in life is to grow and to change and to return toward our core self in which your presence, God, abides. May we, like our namesake, be Yashar El, straight with you, our divine. May we, when we need to, wrestle with you as we wrestle with our highest self to be our best self. And may we declare, Yisrael, that ultimately it is you who empower us, and that it is you who guides us, that it is you to whom we praise, Yisrael, as Israel. May we be aware of where we come from, and may your light guide us toward a better tomorrow, not only for us, but for all the nations through whom we are blessed, through whom you bless. Amen.